Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we tear through a stack of fresh research and hand you the key insights, the knowledge shortcuts you need to be fully informed. Today, we are strapping on our virtual sandals and taking a trip to the ancient world, specifically to the Aegean island of Samos.
Right, Samos. And it's a name that, well, it really rings out historically. We're talking about the ninth largest island in the Aegean, and for centuries, it was a major, major player.
A naval superpower, even, as early as the end of the 8th century BC.
Exactly. It was sort of the epitome of ancient maritime connectivity.
Yeah, when you think ancient Samos, you immediately think of this, international trade hub. They were exporting products that really defined them: pitch, wine, honey, sending them all across the Mediterranean, deep into the Near East. They were plugged in.
Absolutely. And because of that reputation, that's where mostly archaeology is focused, on the flashy, high-profile zones.
The urban centers, the ports.
And especially the monumental sanctuary of Hera, which is incredibly well studied. But here's the thing. If you leave that main city and you travel west into the rugged interior,
The hinterlands.
the hinterlands, exactly, that entire western portion of the island is, well, it's almost a blank slate archaeologically.
And that void is precisely why we're doing this deep dive. We're looking at the west area of Samos Archaeological Project, or WAS-EP.
A fantastic name.
It is. And we're digging into the data they collected between 2021 and 2024. Their mission was straightforward, but just massive.
Basically, to build an understanding from the ground up.
Yeah.
The landscape, the resources, the settlements of Western Samos over this huge chronological sweep.
Huge. We're talking from around 800 BC all the way through to the pre-modern era, so about 1900 AD.
And our goal today is to really synthesize what they found, because it really changes how we think about ancient economic life.
So this gets us to the main question for you. We know Samos had this huge global reputation, but how did the actual everyday life of the people in those quiet rural areas connect, or maybe not connect to, that massive network of wealth and trade?
Did that internationalism actually trickle down, or was it sort of blocked at the coast?
Exactly. And that contrast is really the heart of the WASAP data.
It is.
Okay, so let's get into the mechanics. To bridge this gap between the loud maritime power and the quiet rural life, WASAP used a really modern interdisciplinary approach.
Yeah, this was not just shovels and brushes. They combined intensive pedestrian field walking, reconnaissance, detailed drone photography.
And crucially, ethnographic research. So actually talking to and learning from the people who live there today.
Which is so important for context. And the whole approach is rooted in the history. I mean, by the 7th century BC, Samos was churning out these transport amphoras.
The shipping containers of the ancient world.
The standardized shipping containers, exactly. And that level of international trade demands enormous resources, raw materials, labor, specialized skills. We knew they were exporting, but we needed to understand the foundation. What landscape underpinned that global network?
And when you say intensive survey, you mean it. This team covered 3.69 square kilometers on foot across the northwest and southwest regions. To put that in perspective for you, that's like 500 football fields, surveyed inch by inch.
It's incredibly demanding work,
Yeah.
but so rewarding. And over the course of that survey, the project identified 15 distinct areas of interest.
So these are like hot spots of ancient activity.
Concentrated pockets,
Yeah.
from isolated farms to small villages.
Yeah.
And the timeline of these sites is just immense. We're talking from the Archaic period, around the 7th century BCE, right through the Roman and into the Byzantine era.
All the way to the 15th century CE. That's over 2,000 years of rural history just poof, brought to the surface. Okay, let's unpack the core finding now. This is where the data really starts to speak. The team analyzed over 1,300 ceramic fragments that they just collected from the surface.
Right, stuff turned up by plows or rooting out of old terraces.
And given Samos's reputation as this international crossroads, you just assume you're going to find pottery from all over the world, right? Fine wares from Italy, cooking pots from other islands, maybe even stuff from North Africa.
That's the logical assumption.
Okay.
But that is not what they found. The core finding is, well, it's genuinely disruptive.
Yeah.
The ceramic evidence showed that daily life in the southwestern rural zones of Samos was, for the most part, remarkably self-sufficient.
Self-sufficient. What does that mean specifically?
It means the economy in these areas was overwhelmingly inward-facing. The vast majority of the pottery they found, the day-to-day stuff, cooking wares, storage vessels, even most tablewares, was all locally produced.
So very little evidence of those long-distance imports you'd expect to see pouring into a naval superpower.
Minimal. It seems the Samian global marketplace, it didn't really reach the average Samian kitchen table.
Wow. I mean, that just rewrites the script on ancient globalization.
It does.
It means while the big ports were thriving as these high-volume hubs, the central business districts of the ancient world, a huge percentage of the population living just a few miles inland was operating on a completely parallel, locally rooted economy.
It's a true dual economy,
Yeah.
operating at the same time. The imports were definitely reaching the main city, the sanctuary, the elite running the trade,
Yeah.
but they weren't penetrating the general rural population to the extent anyone would have assumed.
And this wasn't some fragile, isolated system.
Not at all. This regional network was robust, it was resilient, it sustained itself with local resources and local craftsmanship. It was a highly efficient local system.
I have to ask, though, playing devil's advocate here, how can we be sure they weren't just missing the imported pieces? If the local stuff was tougher or the imports were in areas they didn't survey.
That's an excellent critical question. And it really gets to why their methodology had to be so rigorous. The survey was so intensive, and the comparison with other sites is so robust that the statistical weight of the local wares versus the imports is, well, it's definitive.
So the numbers don't lie.
The numbers don't lie. The researchers are very clear that even when you account for visibility issues or material differences, the evidence just strongly points to this fundamental reliance on local production. It challenges that core assumption that long-distance trade must penetrate all levels of a powerful society.
That's fascinating. Did they find any evidence of this economy changing over time?
They did, yeah. The results highlighted these shifting dynamics in settlement patterns. In one case, they found a small seasonal complex near a minor port that, over generations, it just gradually grew into a larger, more permanent settlement.
But not because of international demand.
Probably not. More likely driven by regional internal needs. Maybe a local increase in farming or a shift in how they manage their own regional distribution before the goods even got to the big harbors.
This is where it gets really interesting. For anyone curious about how modern archaeology actually gets done, how do you manage all that data? 3.69 square kilometers of fragment by fragment information.
Right. And the answer is that the methodology was born digital.
They just threw out the clipboards and paper maps?
Entirely. That shift to paperless is just critical for handling this kind of volume and ensuring accuracy. The goal was instant standardization. So instead of notebooks, every team member had a ruggedized Android tablet.
And they were running special software.
They were running data entry forms designed in an open-source platform called Kobo Toolbox. It let them input everything offline, right there in the field.
So every time a field walker picks up a piece of pottery or notes a change in the soil, it's instantly captured, geo-referenced, and standardized for the whole team.
Precisely. That fragment gets logged, photographed, and attached to a precise GPS coordinate. Then at the end of a long, dusty day, they get back to a place with Wi-Fi, and all that data, the ceramics, the GIS maps, the visibility notes, it all syncs instantly to the cloud.
That speed and standardization is what makes the analysis possible.
It's the backbone of it. It's what allowed them to so quickly and confidently distinguish between local and imported wares across that huge area.
It sounds physically exhausting, though, field walking in the rugged Aegean with high-tech gear.
Oh, absolutely. The rigor of the field mechanics is impressive. The landscape was broken down into units they called tracks, usually 50 by 50 meter squares.
And the walkers were very close together.
Very. Spaced just 10 meters apart, walking in a line. So each person is responsible for a cone of visibility of about a meter on either side of them. This is not a casual hike. It's highly disciplined, slow, methodical work.
And they had to account for the landscape itself, right? All the vegetation, slopes, rocks that might be hiding artifacts.
Yes, that was a required input. They collected ground visibility data for every single tract because they knew Samos is rugged and the terrain could affect what they saw. And they were honest about the text limits, too, noting the GPS in the field generally had a 3 to 5 meter accuracy range.
So all the data was constantly being checked.
Meticulously. Every spatial data point, every map, every boundary was checked for quality and completeness.
Now let's talk about the intelligence behind the survey, the sampling strategies. Because they weren't just walking blindly.
No, this is where their rigor really shines. So take Southwest Samos. They focused on 3 areas they already knew had a lot of pottery on the surface. But instead of just walking every inch of those areas, they alternated rows of explored tracks with unexplored ones. It's a really clever way to increase their overall statistical coverage of a bigger area without having to literally walk every single square meter.
They were getting a reliable picture of the whole without having to survey the whole thing.
Exactly. And when they decided to really zoom in, what they call intensive mini-gridding, down to 10 by 10 meter subunits, they made a critical choice.
Which was?
They chose the locations for this mini-gridding not because they had the most stuff, but because they wanted to find material difference.
So they were comparing an area with fancy fineware fragments to an area that was just full of simple transport amphoras.
Precisely. They were sampling for function, trying to figure out if one spot was a high-status feasting site and another was just a storage depot.
Not just counting broken pots.
Never just counting broken pots. Meanwhile, in northwest Samos, their strategy was different again. They chose 5 areas for complete coverage based on local knowledge, that ethnographic data.
Right.
And then they ran 7 really long test transects, just 1 tract wide, but stretching up to 6 kilometers, basically using them as exploratory feelers to find new, unknown spots for future research.
It sounds like the human element was just as important as the digital one. Tell us more about collecting that local knowledge.
The ethnographic part was essential for context. Systematically gathering information from landowners, from informants in towns like Carlovasi and Maritime Campos.
And this was done with the same digital rigor.
The same rigor. A specific Kobo collect form, and it was done ethically. They required signed consent, and all personal or sensitive information was legally redacted before any of the data was made public.
So they weren't just grabbing GPS points. They were gathering stories, land use history, local memory, and layering it all on top of the physical survey.
And then you pair that with the high-resolution visual data from the drone.
Ah, yes, the drone photography.
They flew a DJI system, pretty low, about 30 meters high, over the key zones. And that imagery gives you the immediate visual context, the slope, the terracing, the vegetation that you need to properly interpret the ground data from the field walkers. It all comes together in one incredibly rich, layered GIS system.
And the end product of all this is an open source powerhouse. All this data is publicly available.
Which is a huge step for the field. Not only does this data set offer a new narrative for Samos, but because WASAP used methods so similar to other big projects nearby, like Project Panorama's just 60 kilometers away.
You can do comparative analysis.
Incredible comparative analysis. We can now robustly evaluate if other regional economies were also this inward-facing. And critically, it gives other archaeologists a chance to really evaluate the effectiveness of this born digital method against older paper-based surveys.
So what does this all mean for us? The big takeaway really is that the archaeological story of Samos is now so much richer. It's no longer just the story of the naval powerhouse and the loud, busy international port. It now explicitly includes the story of the quiet, resilient, and surprisingly self-sufficient life of the rural village.
A village that ran its own local economy right alongside the global trade machine. It forces us to admit that ancient globalization was probably highly segmented.
Right. The big centers were participating, but the actual reach of that trade into the daily life, the household budget of the average person?
It may have been far less profound than we've always assumed. The heart of Samos, away from the coast, really did beat to its own local rhythm.
So here's the final thought for you to chew on. If a society that we celebrate as an ancient naval and trade superpower had this huge rural economy operating almost entirely independent of the global marketplace, how often might we be overestimating the influence of long-distance trade in the daily lives of ancient people across the entire Mediterranean?
What other historical hubs might have these hidden inward-facing hearts that we're just completely overlooking?
Because we only look at the import data from the main port, that is definitely something to mull over the next time you hear a story about ancient connectivity.